Have you ever met someone who understood you too quickly? The kind of person who didn't just listen, but felt everything you said, as if they'd lived your pain before you even spoke it. You didn't know why, but you trusted them. Their calm drew you in. Their silence felt safe, their presence magnetic. You thought you'd found someone different, someone real. But what if that calm wasn't kindness? What if that stillness wasn't peace, but calculation? Most people think danger comes wrapped in arrogance, loudness, ego, but sometimes it comes dressed in empathy. Quiet, composed, intelligent. They don't burn you like fire. They freeze you with precision. The cold empath doesn't want your admiration. They want your patterns. They study the rhythm of your emotions the way a hunter studies the movements of prey. Every smile you give, every secret you whisper, it all becomes data. Not for connection, but for control. They don't manipulate by force. They don't shout or demand. They wait. They learn. They move like water, adapting, absorbing, reflecting. You see yourself in them and mistake it for closeness. You think you've finally met someone who understands your chaos. But that's the trick. They understand because they watch. Because they listen not to connect, but to decode. They don't care about who you are. They care about what moves you. At first it feels healing. Finally, someone gets it. Someone who doesn't judge, who stays calm when everyone else reacts. You open up more. You let them in, deeper and deeper, unaware that every layer you reveal gives them more power. You start to rely on their stability. Their quiet feels like peace, but peace shouldn't feel this fragile. It shouldn't depend on someone else's approval. Then one day, something shifts. You notice their eyes don't light up the way they used to. The empathy that once felt so warm now feels cold, clinical. You realize their words were never spontaneous. They were deliberate, perfectly timed. Every comfort, every pause, every silence, it all had purpose. You start to feel a distance, a disconnect. And suddenly, the calm that once grounded you now feels suffocating. You see the truth. They weren't connecting with you, they were mapping you. The cold empath's power lies in perception. They don't need chaos to dominate you. They only need your trust. And once they have it, they don't have to break you. You'll do it yourself, trying to win back the warmth that was never real. They make you question your instincts, doubt your feelings, even your memories. You start to wonder if you were the problem all along. But you weren't. You were simply seen too clearly by someone who never intended to care. And that's the terrifying beauty of it. The cold empath doesn't destroy you out of rage. They do it out of understanding. They know exactly what will hurt you most, because they've listened to every word you've ever said. They use your truth against you with surgical precision. They don't crave drama or destruction. They crave control through clarity. And clarity in the wrong hands becomes a weapon sharper than cruelty. But here's what they don't tell you. The cold empath loses power the moment you stop seeking their validation. Their control depends on your need to be understood. The moment you stop explaining yourself, you take their weapon away, because they can't study silence. They can't predict stillness. The very thing they use to control you, awareness, becomes your escape. So if you've ever felt that kind of quiet manipulation, if you've ever been drained by someone who seemed endlessly patient but left you feeling hollow, understand this. Your sensitivity isn't weakness. It's power. The only reason the cold empath could reach so deep into you is because you were open, because you care. And that's not something to hide. It's something to protect. You don't need to match their calm. You don't need to outthink them. You simply need to see them, really see them. The moment you recognize what they are, the illusion shatters. Their calm no longer fascinates you. It exposes them. Because true empathy isn't cold. It doesn't analyze, it connects. It doesn't take. It gives. Walk away from those who study your pain and call it understanding. Walk toward those who feel it and help you heal it. The cold empath may seem powerful, but only because you forgot your own. When you reclaim it, when you stop performing for their approval, you'll find that the calm they built around you was never real peace. It was a cage, and you were always the key. You've spent so long trying to be understood that you forgot what it feels like to stand in your own truth. You keep replaying conversations, rewriting your reactions, wondering if you were too much, too cold, too emotional. That's how they win. They make you believe you have to earn clarity, when in reality, it was always yours to begin with. You don't owe anyone understanding. You owe yourself peace. And peace doesn't come from fixing what broke you. It comes from refusing to be broken again. The cold empath taught you one thing: how dangerous it is to hand your emotions to someone who sees them as tools. But their lesson doesn't have to end in pain. It can end in power. Because once you've seen how manipulation hides behind kindness, you can never be fooled by it again. Once you've felt the emptiness behind false empathy, you start to crave truth, even when it hurts. You start to recognize the difference between someone who listens to heal and someone who listens to hold control. That awareness, painful as it is freedom. You start to notice patterns you missed before. The pauses that once seemed patient now feel calculated. The words that once felt comforting now sound rehearsed. It doesn't make you bitter, it makes you awake. You stop giving energy to people who drain you just because they do it quietly. You stop mistaking calm for safety. You stop apologizing for being sensitive, emotional, human. Because now you understand, sensitivity is not weakness, it's vision. You see things others ignore. You feel truths they bury. That's your gift. That's your defense. But to use it, you must stop chasing closure from those who benefit from your confusion. Stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. The moment you stop trying to be seen, you become invisible to those who feed on your openness. And in that invisibility, you reclaim something sacred: your energy, your focus, your direction. The cold empath loses control when you stop needing their validation. They built their power on your self-doubt. The second you believe your intuition again, their influence dissolves like smoke. The mind loves certainty, even when it's painful. That's why you kept returning, hoping for clarity, hoping for proof that what you felt was real. But clarity doesn't come from them. It comes from silence, from sitting with yourself long enough to see that your intuition was right all along. You felt something was off because it was. You hesitated because your instincts were protecting you. Trust that. That's not paranoia, that's wisdom. And now, you stand at a threshold. You can keep replaying what happened, or you can use it as a mirror. You were chosen by a cold empath, not because you were weak, but because you were bright. Your warmth exposed their emptiness. Your openness gave them direction. They needed your light to define their shadow. But you don't need them to define yours. You don't need to prove your worth to anyone who profits from your pain. Every time you pull your energy back, every time you choose silence over reaction, you grow stronger. You stop performing empathy for those who never earned it. You stop explaining, fixing, rescuing. You realize that real compassion doesn't mean self-sacrifice, it means discernment. Who deserves your care? Who earns your peace? These are the questions that rebuild your power. And that's where transformation begins. You no longer seek to be understood. You seek to understand yourself. You start to protect your boundaries with quiet certainty. You no longer flinch when someone withdraws affection to test your loyalty. You've learned the pattern. You see it unfold before it even begins. And this time, you don't play along, you walk away. Not out of anger, but out of awareness. Because you've learned that some people don't want healing, they want control. And you no longer mistake control for connection. That realization changes everything. You start to attract peace instead of tension, depth instead of drama. You start to build relationships that don't demand your silence as proof of your love. You begin to speak from strength instead of fear. You no longer seek mirrors, you seek windows, people who don't reflect you back but help you see beyond yourself. That's where real growth lives. And when the cold empath crosses your path again, and they will, you'll recognize them instantly. You'll see through the calm, the calculated empathy, the strategic stillness. You won't react, you won't explain, you'll just smile and let them talk, knowing that they have no power here anymore. Because the cold empath may understand emotion, but you've learned something far more dangerous. You understand yourself. You've spent years thinking your softness was a liability, that feeling deeply made you an easy target. But that's what the world wanted you to believe. Because a person who feels deeply, who sees through the noise, is powerful beyond measure. That's why the cold empath needed you. They fed on what they couldn't create. They borrowed your light because they had none of their own. But here's what they didn't understand. When you take back your attention, their illusion collapses. They can mimic empathy, but they can't sustain it without your energy. Once you withdraw, they wither. And in that emptiness, you see what was true all along. Your sensitivity was never the weakness. It was the source. This is the moment you choose. The moment you stop playing small to make others comfortable. The moment you stop dimming your intuition to fit into spaces built on manipulation. The cold empath thrives on your uncertainty, your hesitation, your desire to be kind, even when it costs you. But there comes a point when kindness without boundaries becomes self-betrayal. When your silence stops being peace and starts being permission. You've reached that point. Now it's time to remember who you were before you were trained to doubt yourself. You are not here to be studied. You are not here to be analyzed, dissected, or drained. You are here to experience the full force of your own awareness, to feel deeply and still stand firm, to love without losing yourself, to give without becoming empty. The world will always try to teach you that indifference is strength, but true strength is presence, the ability to stay open even when you've been hurt, to trust again, not because you're naive, but because you refuse to let the coldness of others define you. Every time you choose truth over fear, you reclaim a piece of yourself. Every time you stop reacting to manipulation, you take back power they never deserved to hold. And when you finally stop explaining your worth, you become unstoppable. You don't need to prove your light to those who benefit from your confusion. You don't need to earn peace. It's already within you. Waiting beneath the noise, beneath the overthinking, beneath the constant need to be understood. The moment you stop seeking permission to be yourself, you find it. There's a silence that comes after awakening. Not the cold silence of manipulation, but the sacred silence of clarity. In that stillness, you hear your own voice again. You feel your own heartbeat. You start to see how much of your life was spent trying to fix others who never intended to heal. And you stop. Not because you've given up, but because you've finally grown up. You've outgrown the need to save people who enjoy being broken. You've outgrown the illusion that empathy means endless forgiveness. The cold empath once held your reflection hostage, but now you stand before your own mirror. You don't need validation to feel whole. You don't need their understanding to move on. You understand yourself now. You've walked through the confusion, the gaslighting, the emotional games, and you came out clearer than ever. The person who once doubted every instinct is now guided by intuition sharper than any manipulation. That's not a wound anymore, that's wisdom, so stop waiting for closure. Stop waiting for apologies that were never meant to come. The closure is the moment you stop needing their approval to let go. The healing is when you finally see that protecting your peace is not selfish, it's sacred. You don't have to fight them. You don't have to prove anything. Just withdraw your energy, reclaim your silence, and watch how fast they fade. Because the truth is, they never had power over you. They only had the illusion of it, built on your willingness to care. And now you care differently. You care selectively. You care with intention. You protect your energy like it's gold, because it is. You are the light they tried to use as a mirror. But now you burn too bright to be reflected. You move forward, not with anger, but with purpose. You live with depth, not fear. You no longer crave their understanding. You crave peace, creation, truth. And as you rise, you realize something profound. The most dangerous empath is not the cold one. It's the awakened one. The one who sees through manipulation and still chooses compassion, but never at the cost of their soul. You've seen what happens when you let the wrong people define your worth. You've watched how they twist your empathy into submission, how they feed on your silence and call it peace. But now you stand in a different kind of silence. The kind that doesn't hide, the kind that speaks louder than words. This is the silence of awakening, the silence that says, I see everything now. And once you see, you can never unsee. Once the mask is lifted, there's no going back to pretending. The world is full of people who will mistake your kindness for weakness. They'll test your patience, push your limits, and then call you cold when you finally draw the line. But you're not cold. You're clear. You're done bleeding for people who hand you knives in return. You're done explaining your boundaries to those who benefit from crossing them. This isn't hardness. This is evolution. The part of you that once needed to be understood no longer begs for permission to exist. It simply exists. And that's where your power begins. Because the truth is, no one can drain you without your consent. No one can take from you unless you stay open to the taking. You're realizing that love doesn't have to mean exposure. Compassion doesn't have to mean vulnerability without protection. You can care and still say no. You can forgive and still walk away. You can be soft and still be unstoppable. That balance, the ability to feel without being consumed, is the mark of true strength. It's what the cold empath could never understand because they confuse control with connection. But connection isn't built on strategy. It's built on truth. And truth doesn't tremble. Truth doesn't apologize. Truth doesn't need validation. When you begin to live in truth, you stop chasing attention, you stop craving recognition, you stop seeking closure. You simply move. You move with clarity, you move with conviction. You move with the quiet confidence of someone who has seen both darkness and light and learned how to walk through both. That's what power looks like when it's no longer disguised as performance. That's what freedom feels like when it stops asking to be earned. Every time you choose presence over reaction, you break the cycle that once trapped you. Every time you refuse to explain yourself to someone who doesn't listen, you reclaim a piece of your voice. You stop needing to be liked because you've outgrown the illusion that being liked means being safe. You start choosing authenticity over approval, peace over performance, solitude over shallow validation. You begin to build your life not around who might abandon you, but around who cannot shake you. And that's where real transformation happens. When you stop chasing love as a reward and start embodying it as a state of being, you stop asking who deserves your care and start asking who matches it. You stop begging people to stay and start building spaces that are worth staying in. The moment you stop trying to fix those who break you is the moment you finally heal. You start seeing your own reflection not as something to be corrected, but as something to be honored. There will always be people who operate from emptiness, who mimic empathy to feel powerful, but they can only survive in your life if you keep giving them oxygen. The moment you stop feeding the illusion, it dies. And in that death, you are reborn. You realize that protecting your energy isn't selfish, it's sacred. You understand that boundaries aren't walls, they're filters for peace. You start living with intention, every word deliberate, every choice aligned. You no longer rush to prove your worth because you've seen what happens when you hand it away. You've learned that the most dangerous thing about losing yourself is realizing how easy it was to give away what was never meant to be shared so freely. Now you guard it, fiercely, quietly, unapologetically. You let your calm speak louder than their chaos. You let your silence echo louder than their noise. You stop chasing the idea of being understood and instead start embodying understanding itself. That's the difference between who you were and who you are becoming. The old you needed proof. The new you simply knows. The old you sought safety in others. The new you creates it within. And when you reach that point, when your peace no longer depends on anyone's behavior, you become untouchable. Because the cold empath can only control those who haven't yet discovered the warmth of their own power. You know now that peace isn't something you find, it's something you decide to protect. But protection doesn't come from building walls. It comes from awareness. It comes from finally seeing what you've been allowing. The cold empath didn't take your power, you handed it over, piece by piece. Every time you doubted your own intuition, you gave it away when you stayed silent to keep the peace, when you swallowed your truth to avoid conflict, when you let someone else's calm convince you that your fire was too much. But that fire was never the problem. It was the warning, the signal that something sacred inside you was being smothered. You've been taught to be kind, to understand, to forgive. But no one told you that understanding without boundaries becomes submission. No one warned you that forgiveness, when given too easily, teaches people how to hurt you again. You were never weak for caring. You were unguarded. You opened your heart to those who only wanted to study it. But now you see the cost of that openness without discernment. Every time you silenced your instinct, you made room for someone else's control. Every time you waited for them to change, you forgot that you could. And now you're changing. Not in loud, dramatic ways, but in silence, in clarity, in discipline. You're no longer chasing peace, you're creating it. You're learning that walking away isn't cold, it's sacred self-respect. You're realizing that closure doesn't come from confrontation, it comes from choosing not to reopen what hurt you. You've stopped trying to make them see what they were never capable of seeing. That's not bitterness, that's maturity. Because some people can't meet you at your depth without drowning, and you no longer shrink to save them. The cold empath taught you how dangerous emotional intelligence becomes when detached from compassion. They showed you how awareness, when used without love, becomes a weapon. But you've taken that same awareness and turned it into healing. You've taken the manipulation they tried to use against you and transformed it into understanding. That's what makes you powerful. You see through masks without needing to wear one. You read energy without letting it define you. You no longer absorb other people's pain. You witness it, learn from it, and release it. And now something inside you is awakening. The realization that your sensitivity was never a flaw. It's your compass. It's how you read truth in silence, how you sense danger before it speaks, how you know when something isn't right, even when everyone else pretends it is. That knowing is sacred. It's instinct refined by experience, and it will never mislead you again if you trust it. Every time you ignore your intuition, you pay with your peace. But when you honor it, you move through life with precision. You stop chasing what's not meant for you. You stop settling for almost. You start choosing what aligns. This isn't about revenge. It's about rebirth. It's about looking in the mirror and realizing that every wound became wisdom, every betrayal became vision, every loss became direction. You no longer define yourself by what was taken. You define yourself by what you refused to lose, your humanity. That's what makes you unstoppable. Because they can mimic empathy, but they can't fake evolution. They can imitate awareness, but they can't sustain growth. And when you keep growing, you become unreachable to those still trapped in manipulation. You start to walk differently, speak differently. You no longer chase intensity, you crave consistency. You no longer confuse control for care. You no longer tolerate connections that demand your self-abandonment as proof of your loyalty. You give without fear, but never without thought. You love deeply, but not blindly. You've learned that love without awareness is chaos, and awareness without love is cruelty. The power is in the balance. The power is in being awake and kind at the same time. And that's the moment everything shifts. The energy that once attracted users now repels them. The calm that once made you a target now makes you magnetic to truth. You've stepped out of the game completely. You no longer need to prove your strength by surviving manipulation. You prove it by no longer entertaining it. You walk away before the chaos begins. You choose stillness before the storm arrives. You trust yourself enough to know that nothing real will ever require you to abandon who you are. Because the cold empath may have studied emotion, but you embody it. They may have understood patterns, but you've transcended them. They live in control. You live in truth, and truth always wins. You've reclaimed what they tried to imitate, the calm that comes from genuine peace, the power that comes from knowing yourself completely. And once you reach that, nothing and no one can ever use your light against you again.